So now on to our last panel, the latest and greatest SEO and SEM tips. So we welcome Ryan Berryman. Ryan Berryman is here. He will be our moderator, and we have a panel of very distinguished experts. Let me go ahead and introduce them. So the first is Andy Atkins-Krueger. He is the CEO of Web Certain Group, and Andy contributes to international search publications and blogs, including Search Engine Land and Search Engine Watch. He is the managing editor of multilingualsearch.com and the chair of the International Search Summit. Second is Bruce Clay, and he is the president of Bruce Clay, Inc. Since 1996, Bruce has been a recognized leader in the internet business consulting arena and is a popular speaker at conferences including Search Engine Strategies, PubCon, AdTech, and Search Marketing Expo. Third, we have Seth Dotterer, and he is the head of marketing at Conductor. He has over 14 years of experience counseling startups and Fortune 100 companies on their marketing strategies, utilizing technology and metrics to increase sales and profitability. He has been obsessed with SEO and SEM. And finally, we have Danny Sullivan, who is the editor-in-chief of Search Engine Land. Danny is considered a leading search engine expert and journalist. He has written about search for nearly 15 years and produces the SMX Search Marketing Expo Conference Series and writes a personal blog called Daggle. So, thank you and welcome to our speakers, and on to Ryan to have the conference.
Thank you, Peter. I'm really glad to be formulating this panel again. We've had a lot of exciting times over the last year. Search has definitely changed a lot since the last time this group gathered, and I'd love to get some of your guys' insights. Why don't I start with Seth? You advise a lot of very large Fortune 500 clients, and they may not be the quickest and on top of the latest changes in search as kind of we're all tasked with doing. How do you advise those clients, and what are some of the trends that you see that affect them the most?
Sure. Thanks, Al. Thanks for throwing me out there, right?
Yeah, you're welcome. Throw you in the pool.
Exactly. So I think we've really seen over the last year the end of the SEO practitioner as a sort of technical guru, and that was it. We've seen organizations really look to have to measure and report on their ROI and grow and do continual improvement, and really push that into just like every other marketing metric. It's not acceptable any longer to look at those same 1,000 keywords and get that ranking report anymore. It's really pushing it out, and the CMOs are demanding the metrics that they get from all their marketing vehicles. They start taking a look at like a portfolio approach, that I may look at the keywords that are about to pay off for me. These are the keywords that are my money business keywords. These are the things that I have to work on down the road, and it's much more of a disciplined approach, I think.
That's great. And Bruce, you work with kind of similar set of clients. Are you seeing the same type of trends? And maybe give us some insight into how is reporting and accountability around SEO kind of changed over the last year or two? It seems like a year or so ago, like Seth mentioned, it was just a matter of sending out a ranking report or saying, I bought you 1,000 links, aren't I doing my job well? Now that the budgets are increasing and there's more accountability, what are you seeing? What kind of reports are people demanding? What do your clients look to you to deliver in terms of accountability?
Now, we cater to large and small accounts. So it's not just Fortune thousands, it's large, small people. Some of them are able to do the work themselves. Some of them hire us to do the work. Some of them want to do it themselves but need somebody to guide them. So when you look at that as sort of a large group, I think the first thing we're finding is definitely it used to be more technical. If we were to attend a conference and there'd be 5,000 people in the audience, it would be predominantly webmaster, trained, skilled, HTML knowledgeable people. Now we're finding that there's a lot of more what I would call marketing-centric, not technical-centric people that attend conferences, that call us up. So we've, as a business, we've been forced almost to reallocate the resources, and even in SEO, we find ourselves dealing with a lot of internet marketing optimization kinds of projects. How does it work with my pay-per-click, and what kind of analytics is a good measurement of this? It's no longer about just ranking, it's now about traffic. And it's no longer just traffic, it's conversion. And how do we report it, and how do we end up with a cohesive program that goes across the organization and touches all those different pieces. So I'd say that SEO is still critical. It is still a very significant cornerstone in a marketing program. I just see it becoming more of a marketing brick than the brick. It's a piece of the pie, not the entire pie.
Gotcha.
And that's an evolution.
And you know, we just another question for you, Bruce. We have an auction coming up in about an hour and a half or so. And last year we talked about the importance of kind of keyword domains. And how important are you finding that in SEO or SEM? And how do you advise your clients, you know, who may be either participating in the auction or some of the folks in the room who own very attractive portfolios of names? How valuable is the domain name to search strategies?
Recently, it's become even more important. Google turned up the dial, and then they turned it down a little bit, but it's still net up. So I got a story. So I own this domain called SEOtools.com because I make SEO tools. And I've owned it for 11 years. I consider it a rather significant domain, but I always redirected it. I never really built it out. Then a number of people offered me money for it. And then I figured if it's worth something to somebody else, it's probably worth that much to me. So I decided to build it up, but I didn't have time to do it. So I put, I think it was 8 pages on it. And I mean literally an overnight project. I put it up, 8 pages. And ever since it was spidered, it has been number 8 for the term SEO tools. Nothing on it, no link development. So my guess is that an exact match domain name helps. And I would encourage people to always do it. The only caveat to that is that local search is becoming even more critical. And I think it's going to be a matter of time until city name, either as a subdomain or part of the main domain name, is going to significantly influence results as well.
Very interesting. Andy, you and I were chatting earlier about kind of IDNs, the international domain names, and you know, particularly with the new TLDs that are coming out. Do you see the same kind of trend in terms of importance of domain names in the international market? And you know, maybe give us a little more information on the IDNs and how those are being viewed.
Well, I think in the international market, the local domain has been significantly important for quite some time, and the availability of IDNs you know, even just increases that. And I agree with Bruce about exact match keywords in domains. And if you're working in multiple languages, then that starts to raise questions about which keyword are you going to use, because it might be different. So there's a few issues there. But I think that you and I were having a conversation about Yandex.
Yeah.
And because of the panel that I saw yesterday, I thought to myself, I'll speak to Yandex and see what their attitude is towards the .rf, you know, the new Cyrillic domain name for Russia, expecting them to say that it's really significant and you know, we're going to work harder with it, we're going to promote those sites and so on. But what they actually said was, we like the .ru, but we're redirecting the .rf in the Cyrillic characters to our main site because that's good for our users. But the Latin characters always have a killer benefit in that they can be typed into any browser. And I thought it was interesting coming from the #1 search engine in Russia.
Got it. That's very interesting. And do you see in the international market, I mean, you mentioned the browser, and we always talk a lot about browser technology and how is it changing, and you know, Chrome's doing things a little bit differently than say IE or others. I'd imagine that's even much more important, you know, the functionality of the browser when you deal with multi-byte characters and stuff like that. Can you just talk a little bit more about how that works in an international context?
Well, I think the most significant thing is not so much the browsers, but actually the keyboard. And that was something that came up yesterday. And, you know, there are 15 different ways to input Chinese characters. And, you know, and there's 2 steps, typically, to input a character. So that makes the whole process of search more complex. And one of the interesting things about that is I only relatively recently discovered this, but the reason why numbers are so popular in China for domain names is because they can type those numbers directly from any keyboard, and they don't have to go through 2 steps. So some of the biggest sites in China are with numbers because people can type them easily, which is an interesting insight.
That's very interesting, and I think the crowd knows quite a bit about type-in traffic and the value of that. So that's very interesting to learn that from an international perspective. Danny, I want to ask you a couple questions. There have been a lot of, like I started off the panel, a lot of things have happened in the last year. What are some of the major trends that you've seen? I mean, we've had, the Yahoo Bing migration. We've had Google making a lot of changes in various segments of their search. What are some of the major trends that you see kind of happening as we speak or over the last couple of months, or maybe even kind of the rumor mill of what might be to come that may impact either how we execute SEM strategies or SEO strategies?
I think the collision of social and search continues to be an amazing thing to watch. I did an article at the end of December where I went back to Google and I went back to Bing and I said, all right, people have talked about maybe social signals will get used and we suspect some of it's going to be going on, but what exactly are you doing with it? Are you using these sorts of things? Can you tell that someone on Twitter has authority independent of their page? Do you know that I have an authority or I don't have an authority? And they actually confirmed a number of things. They said, yes, we're, if you will, trying to calculate a social rank. And that's something that we're factoring in, and we're factoring it in even to web search. Or it was interesting to discover things like, wow, Twitter has no follow visibly on the website, and so you think all those links don't count. As it turns out, Google and Bing actually get the links from Twitter and the tweets from Twitter through what's called the fire hose, and the fire hose is no follow free. So those links actually do count and are being counted, and was something that would have never even occurred to me, right? Because you're so used to whatever you see out on the web must be the way they see it, and it turns out that's not really the case. So these social areas are having an impact, and I think that if there are still some naysayers who are thinking, oh, it's that crazy social stuff, it has nothing to do with search, it really does. And the thing is that they don't really know quite what to do with it, and they're still figuring out the presentations and everything else. And I think as long as you're participating in social and you're building up authority there, it should help you on the search side. I wouldn't go, running out and saying the sky is falling, it's social pieces coming down on me. But I think you need to be aware of it. It's very similar to when links started becoming useful in SEO. Link building was not an SEO process. You had people who did SEO and you had people who did link building. And then suddenly it was like, well, if you're doing SEO, you probably either need to know how to do link building or you better work with someone who knows it, because those links are important. And similarly with if you're doing SEO and you're not involved in social, you better make sure you're working with somebody who does. Mm-hmm. The other big trend is probably the continued verticalization of search. And I think it was in October, we got a real dramatic change where Google took places and turned them into, if you will, regular listings. So previously, you'd gone to Google, you did your search, you got listing, some local search in pizza in Santa Monica, and you had like listing, map, listing, little tiny listings, more listing, regular listings. And they changed it around. They took all those little tiny map listings and turned them into the regular results. Which was interesting to me because it's something I've been saying, this will happen at some point. Just like at some point you will do a news search, and rather than getting, say, the top news articles from across the web, you might actually just get the results from Google News, which again are the top news articles, but it would be even more fresher information. And so I think you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to do shopping searches on Google, and rather than here's shopping box with shopping listings, the shopping results themselves will be the main listings. The same thing may happen with video. And so I think that means that if you have been really focused only on web page results and you have been ignoring the verticals, you're getting a really dramatic wake-up call that you do have to pay attention to those verticals, and should, because a lot of times the verticals operate like it's still 1997 and a little metadata, and you don't have a lot of competition, and suddenly you're doing well.
Right.
So those would be the two things I would say really strike me the most, the social aspect and the continuing verticalization as trends.
And Seth, have you seen from any of your clients some impact of the changes in Google Places? And
absolutely, yeah.
I've noticed it dramatically changes the page, which I would imagine it could affect bidding strategies and everything else.
Absolutely, and all the different items that show up on those pages all look differently, and all the metrics we've used for years and years don't mean anything anymore. What you thought was third position might be buried beneath a bunch of other stuff, and that's all generating the traffic, and people are struggling to deal with that. And I think the first thing that Danny said really resonated with me. We have this blurring between earned media, social, SEO, PR, and bought media, right? The paid link, PPC, the other kinds of elements like display ads and everything you would go along those lines. And there's no longer this separate thing where you're going to put the earned media off in its corner and just let it do its thing. The people are going out there and actively working that. And I think we'll continue to see that line moving forward because it just goes all the way through. Your social strategy affects your PR, affects everything along those lines. It goes all the way through your marketing strategy.
That's very interesting. How would you advise a small person who owns a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand, tens of thousands of domains, that wants to start building out these sites? What are some of the basics that you would have them keep in mind? And I know this might have changed over the last couple of years. So, do you go out and buy thousands of backlinks? Do you go hire a bunch of content farms to get some content for you? What are some best practices that you would advise people, and probably more importantly, what would you advise them to stay away from?
It all depends on your strategy, right? Different people have different ways of monetizing their sites, whether they're looking for going after those affiliates and long tail keywords. And the thing that I would say as you talk about those exact match domains is, don't go out there and put the same content on all your domains because it won't work that way. But you have to match up what you're trying to achieve with however many other people out there are trying to do exactly the same thing. And find your area along that niche where you think you can compete and measure like crazy all the way on there. You'll find some strategies. Content is key on developing those long tail terms. We're talking with people today about ways on when they write content, embedding links to yourself in them so that when everyone else scrapes all your content to do those same things, they link back to you. That's a great strategy. So make all those people who are taking your content out there, use the scrapers for themselves. There are a lot of different elements, but they all depend on whether you're going after, I'm putting all of my eggs in one basket and I'm going after big head terms, or I have tens or hundreds of thousands of individual niches that I have to find a way to go after in scale.
When kind of following up on some of the places conversation, Danny, I guess I'll refer this question to you. We've seen not just places, but a lot of different changes to the Google page, and some of them, like you mentioned, Google News now kind of redirecting to some of their own content and their own sites, which seem to be scraped in many cases. But we'll table that for a second. There seems to be a lot of concern in the industry about Google promoting their own properties, and what's the general feel out there, whether it's them placing their own mortgage lead generation ads or things like that? And I know seems like there's some regulatory questions. It's starting to dip into some of the ITA acquisition conversations. What concerns do you see in the marketplace around just Google controlling where this traffic directs and also operating the marketplace at the same time?
So there are a lot of concerns about Google generally, and I mean this because to say that so people who don't like Google or are concerned about Google will then quickly latch on to anything that seems to have some legs, even if that's not a broader consumer issue. So is the typical consumer concerned that when they search on Google, Google shows them shopping results from Google shopping search engine? Nothing that I've seen like that. And in fact, there was one poll that came out recently. It wasn't a huge number of people, but it was from an actual polling agency, and they talked to 800 people, and they said, do you think the government needs to regulate search engines and make sure they're fair? It's like, no.
Right.
It was like, no, like 77% said no. But you have, in the EU, an antitrust investigation that's going on the back of primarily 3 tiny companies that feel like Google decided it needed to take its entire muster and prevent them from ranking. Because that's what you do if you're Google, right? You say, you know what? I could fight with Microsoft, but no, I don't want to block them. I'm going to block out a tiny shopping search engine nobody's heard of in the UK, even within the UK. So my sarcasm is coming through, but
right.
But those, everybody else, by the way, who doesn't rank well in Google has been doing it stupid and just been complaining that Google doesn't fight spam properly or that Google isn't ranking things properly. Clearly, they should have said Google's being anti-competitive with us. But that anti-competitive argument has caught on in various places, and you can look at it, and on the face of it, it sounds really, how evil could they be? I mean, I do a search on Google, and then Google tries to send me right back into its own shopping search. Therefore, Google is just trying to keep me there. It's like, what happens when I go into the shopping search? I get listings from companies all across the web, and if I click on them, I go off to companies off of Google. If I go into Google News, what do I get? I get a bunch of links that horribly trap me on other websites that are off of Google. If I go and I do a local search and I click on one of these links, I end up getting information that takes me off of Google, right? And so to me, the thing isn't that Google runs its own vertical search. It should be doing that. And in fact, its competitors do that. And no one starts saying Microsoft shouldn't run a travel search engine because that's going to compete with Expedia. And how come Bing isn't going to be unfair to Expedia if they're running it, right? A search engine should be giving you a specific search experience so that you're not having to go and ask your question, click on a link that takes you to another site that just asks the question again. And when I did one article, I took it, I said, if you want to go to the extreme then, every time I do a search on Google, I should get a link for whatever I searched for that takes me over to Bing to show me the results from Bing, or shows me the results from Yahoo, or the results from Yandex, that Google shouldn't have search at all. To me, the concern is Google actually trying to direct me to its own properties and keep me there? To me, a search engine's job is to point me to destinations, not to be a destination. And in a lot of cases, Google is doing that very well. And these vertical search engines that people want to say it's Google trying to protect its own thing, no, I don't see it that way. But where I do tend to get concerned is when you see them put places listings up, for example, and I think they've gotten better at this, but about a year ago, you would click and you kind of had to struggle to get off of Google. You would do a search for a place, you would click, it would take you to the Google Places page, which was assembled with information from all over the web, which was nice and handy, although it caused some concerns from some of the travel search engines or Yelp or other people. But somewhere in that mess was the actual website you were trying to go to. And I kind of felt like, that ought to be the first thing I get. That ought to be the prominent thing. You want to mention you have a places page and everything else going along the side, you can do that. And I think they've dampened that down. But they still have other conflicts, such as YouTube is probably the best example of this, right? That YouTube is a destination. And, this inherent conflict when you do a search and you get a YouTube video, was I getting it because Google was trying to favor itself, or was I getting it because there's a lot of stuff on YouTube and it made sense to show up? And that's just a weakness that they tend to struggle with. But most of the arguments I've seen on do they favor themselves or not don't go into that subtlety. They go into things that I tend to find ridiculous because I tend to find them very blunt. You can't have a vertical search engine. You can't send someone to Google Images if they search for an image. Apparently you should send them to Bing Images, right? It's that kind of argument, and I just don't think that's what a search engine should be doing. I think it was fine.
Right. Andy, you mentioned video search, and there was some discussion about that yesterday. Are you seeing the same appetite for video search, and also, any of your clients interested in optimizing around video placements, and how should people think about video content, either domestically or internationally? But what have you found amongst your clients?
Well, I mean, YouTube is huge globally. There's no question. It's the second largest search engine in terms of queries.
Yeah.
So, and it's particularly significant in Asia. So, you know, it's something that you have to play with. And I think one of the things we've noticed is there are more examples now of companies looking on the shelves to find the videos that they've had for some time and thinking about localizing those videos and using them to promote themselves in more languages. Because what tended to happen previously was the videos were something they did, and they did it for the largest market, which was English speaking. So they never really broadened that out into other languages, and that's definitely not the case. I mean, we're now getting projects where it's like 24 languages on the homepage, and we've got videos, and we need the voiceovers doing, and we've got 4 weeks to do it. Is, you know, the kind of thing that's coming at us now. So, yeah, I mean, video has definitely been picked up as a significant global promotional opportunity by people, by marketers.
There's still a huge opportunity too. I mean, the standard click-through curves blow up completely the minute a video appears in that SERP. People go right to the video. It's no longer, you know, the same waterfall we've all grown to live and love. And yet, there's so few people aggressively doing video that there's enormous opportunity out there for the people who can find content that does align with those video and optimize them appropriately.
Taking that point, just imagine how much opportunity there is outside of English.
That's right.
You know, it's
That's
vast.
right. That's right.
Yeah, and we heard a little bit about that yesterday with respect to Google Instant, where if you're typing, as soon as you get one of those pages that has either promoted videos or promoted images, it just kind of stops the search process and redirects the user's mindset. Have you seen some of that as well with Google's Instance impact on that?
We did a research study on Google Instant.
Why don't we back up a step? Why don't you describe for the audience what Google Instant is?
So Google Instant, if you're typing away, it used to be waited till you were done with the entire search query, and then you could hit return, right? And then you got your results. And so the concern when Google came out was that it was going to eliminate all of those long tail queries, that everybody who couldn't rank for, you know, insurance, because there are 10 people in the world who can rank for insurance, would go after insurance quotes for cars on Long Island, you know, or Westchester, and that would be their niche, and that they would go away. And what we found was people still typed. We looked at hundreds of thousands of searches pre and post Google Instant coming down, and said, what are the length of queries that are going after, and how concentrated are they? And the curves looked identical. So what ended up happening was the actual click-throughs, people were finding what they wanted more quickly. Now the advertising that was coming along was getting a lot more impressions. So people who were bidding for CPMs were seeing their ability to brand a little bit more at the top of those results. But there's still that opportunity to go after them. And while we expected sort of contraction of the head terms to go there, it's still there, it's still alive, and that hasn't changed it. It's just changed how we go about the process. It makes it faster. You know, they said you can get X number more searches done more quickly, which, you know, we're always happy about.
Right. Bruce, have you seen any impact of Google Instant on SEO at all, either in terms of what you advise clients to target, what kind of keywords they should be focused on, or?
Yes and no. What we have noticed is that Google Instant is giving you some information relative to query behavior, and that it's recommending, if I'm typing in a 3-word query, it's recommending what the 4th word might be. And we're finding that if we optimize for that list of the 4th word as a part of our 3-word optimization, the stability of the 3-word becomes stronger. So it actually has a stabilizing effect if you pay attention to the additional word when you're optimizing for the first 3-word phrase. So that part actually works out pretty well. The problem I have is that Instant is supposed to save you a few seconds of query, and more than often it causes you to go on sort of a tangent that wastes like 5 minutes. So you do one 5-minute tangent, it makes up for all those 2-second query saves that you've done, and people go where they're not going to convert half the time because they're sort of wandering around or stumbling through your site or somewhere else. So I'm not sure that the conversion holds the way it should. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, conversion is becoming an increasing component to a number of the comments already made. I think that we have found that video when you have video on your page versus text and images, that the video has a 48% increase in conversion over the page without the video, all else being equal.
In the actual conversion rate on the page.
The actual conversion rate on the page with the video converts higher. So I think that's a significant fact. And relating to your earlier question about the audience here and how things work in domains, I have a view that there's really like 3 layers of people doing domains. There's the person that buys and churns. I buy it, I don't develop it, it's worth something. I may sit on it a little bit, find the right kind of guys that would want to buy it, and then I sell it for a profit. And it's an undeveloped resource because, let's face it, we're not, all of us SEOs to be able to develop it up or build it or do that.
Right.
There's a group of people that are in the middle that are maybe making $5,000, $10,000, and they've developed up 10 of them. And they're making money on each of them, but they're not making so much money on any one of them that they can afford to do a full-fledged SEO type project. Those are the people that ought to convert better. They ought to focus on the little things that aid in the area of conversion. Then you have the people with the flagship type domains where you build it up, it's worth $1 million more than if you didn't. And there's sort of that level there. Clearly, I think where conversion helps, images help, video helps, understanding the long tail query helps, is in the middle. That helps more than anything else. The people that just churn it, the long tail may identify some additional domain purchase opportunities, perhaps. The people in the middle, if I'm making X and I'm not going to spend a lot of money to develop it, I want to make more than that just by improving my conversion. The people at the high end, it's just pure money. Mm-hmm. You want to develop it as well as you can.
Got it. Thanks. Let's just shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about the kind of Bing Yahoo migration. Seems to have changed the search landscape a bit. And Danny, I'd love to ask some of your thoughts about what you see in the marketplace. And let's start off by talking just about SEM in particular. And, kind of seemed within a matter of a month or so, there was dramatic shifts in terms of bidding strategies from Yahoo into Bing. And what have you heard in the marketplace? Is there a different strategy for Bing than there was for Yahoo, or in particular for Google? And should we just focus on Google? Do we focus on Google and Bing? How should one think about these two players in the marketplace?
It's just Google. You don't have to worry about Bing. Especially because Bing uses Google now, so you don't have to.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. Get to that in a minute.
I know we'll get back to that later.
That will pick up here later.
And that's so not true, but it would make things a lot easier, right? I think Google and Bing are both important, and you need to pay attention to them. I think that on the SEO side, and this is accepting from the whole, copying or they not or whatever. In general, it was always the case that if you were doing the right things for Google, you were probably doing the right things for Bing, even though everything wasn't exactly alike. So it wasn't like, and it's only been recently that we've had some people think maybe I should have a special Bing SEO strategy. And for the most part, that really doesn't seem to be something people have found useful so far. On the SEM side or the PPC side, I haven't heard that much reaction. I'll be curious to hear what others say, but I've had a few advertisers question why Yahoo's matching seemed to be a bit different. Like their ads are coming up for broader ranges of terms on Yahoo than they might do at Bing, and that doesn't seem to make sense, and it suggests that Yahoo is doing something different there. So that was one thing that I've heard. I just heard recently somebody saying that they've discovered that I think their ads aren't doing as well now, with the suspicion being that previously Yahoo's search results were apparently so bad that people were just clicking on the ads, and now that they're using Bing's results, which are better, people are paying more attention to it. But that was just an anecdotal thing, so don't do whatever you want. But it's not backed by some giant survey or anything like that.
I mean, but that's an interesting question. Maybe Seth, you can comment on maybe some experiences from your clients, of course, without divulging anything confidential. But is there a conversion difference between Bing traffic and Google traffic?
Absolutely.
And how should us as marketers think about that?
I think that just like any media buy, you're going to have different conversion rates depending on the source of that buy. You're going to have different demographics across different search engines. Where did they come from? Did they start using this search engine 10 years ago, and it just popped up when they said you got mail, and they've stuck there, or have they migrated elsewhere? And I think you see, just like you see Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer differences in the demographics on who uses those browsers, it's the same thing on the engines.
And you still don't have a choice. You can buy Bing, you're getting Yahoo. You can't have one or the other, right?
Yeah, the transition team was a little bouncy at times when people moved campaigns from their Yahoo to the Microsoft, or they had both and they wanted to merge them, and I think the Yahoo team did a as good of a job as they could have in facilitating that move over to those. But people have set up strategies differently for those different kinds of markets, and they are different buying behaviors. And I think the one key complaint that I heard was the inability to differentiate the ads I'm talking about specifically on the PPC side now, to the two different audiences. It was a uniform piece that once it came in, you got the both of them as a package. But just like everything, it evolves, and people find new ways to optimize.
Are you?
It's had some fairly significant consequences in Asia as well, because Google's now powering Yahoo in Japan. So they've effectively got first position there, which they didn't have previously. Naver in South Korea used to use the Overture platform, but partly as a result of all this alliance thing, they've built out their own system, which has now gone live. So there's now a #1 search engine in South Korea that has its own system. So, there have been some consequences, and Alibaba in China, with their 40% shareholding to Yahoo, things there are getting very complex at the minute. So people are having to change their strategies or rethink which search engines they use, in fact, in some parts of Asia as an indirect result of the alliance.
Oh, so you're seeing actual users start to shift their preference?
Well, you've got to move to Google to get your ads into Japan now, whereas previously you would be using Yahoo, so it's a fairly significant change in terms of strategy.
Wow, that is pretty impactful. Back to Seth, do you find that intuition would seem to tell me that, Bing, Yahoo, even if it's combined and now that it's larger, might be a less competitive marketplace, and that might be an opportunity to get higher ROI on my search spend. Do you see results that bear that out?
Absolutely. There's no question that some people just ignore it because they say, well, I don't have the time to spend in two different places, so I'm going to spend in one. And then it becomes just an auction. And when there are less people participating in the auction, as we all know, the prices don't go as high. So you have to then start your strategies on saying, how far down the tail do I go in Google before I set up another strategy for Bing, Yahoo?
Got it. That's very interesting. Why don't we go back to our recent controversy, Danny, that you were mentioning earlier? Why don't you inform the audience kind of the allegation of using Internet Explorer to better search results, and at least tee up the conversation a little bit. Give us some of your insights.
So,
I know you've been
it's been a busy week
on the front line there.
So Friday I had a trip to Google, which had actually been scheduled 2 weeks before I got there, because they said they wanted to share some information with me. And what they shared was that they had run this sting operation to discover that Bing apparently seemed to be copying their results. And they had 20 different engineers using Internet Explorer with suggested sites in the Bing toolbar, and they made these fake words, one of which Stephen Colbert was saying last night. I can't remember how he pronounced it. It was like, blah, blah, blah. And when you had searched for these words originally, nothing came up on Google, or really low quality stuff. And then they made it so that you would search for these words, and this really unusual site that was completely unrelated would appear. And then by doing that, they told the engineers, well, search on Google, click on the site, and that's it. But do it in Internet Explorer. And the idea was that information was being transmitted back to Bing, because Bing, being part of Microsoft, gets this whole click stream or view stream or search stream. And about 2 weeks after they did this, these results started showing up on Bing. And the only reasonable reason for these things to show up there is that Bing had basically seen that they were being listed on Google and therefore decided, okay, well, I guess we should be listing them too. And so the Google engineers went, there's a technical term for it, I think it's called ape shit. And just felt like, wow, we have got the smoking gun here. This confirms all the evilness we always thought Microsoft had, and they're just stealing all of our stuff. And in particular, they're concerned that for some, these were made up words, but they were concerned especially that for some very unusual queries, they may have found a page that Bing didn't have, and if a user on their site with IE transmits that back to Bing, then Bing is learning better quality from Google. And so they felt like, these people are riding on our backs. So this all came out on, I can't remember now because I've lost track of the days, on Tuesday. I spent all day Monday writing it and had talked to Bing about it in the morning and said they're making these allegations, and Bing decided to give me a statement that basically confirmed that these things were influencing it, but didn't really want to talk about it in any more depth until after this event that they were having on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, there was this big Bing event that Google was ironically part of for a special panel, which is all available now online. You can watch the fisticuffs between Harry Shum and Matt Cutts, Matt of Google and Harry Shum. But suffice to say, Bing had some issues with what Google was saying. And from Bing's point of view, they're saying, yes, we do have a clickstream of information that comes from all over the web, of which you, Google, are a part of, in case you didn't realize that. We watch what people are doing, and we use what they're doing to try to influence our search results. So we may see that a lot of people are going to a particular website. That might help us understand it. We might see that people are doing things on Google, and we think that's perfectly fine. We think that you do the same thing with the Google toolbar if the PageRank is enabled. And we don't think we're doing anything wrong here. And we think that in some very rare and unusual cases, yes, the user behavior might cause our results to be similar. They won't say the word copy, but they won't say the word copy because to them copy means we literally went over and did it ourselves, rather than we just learned from what the user was doing. But they will admittedly say, yes, in a few weird cases, to them, a few small cases, this thing will happen. And so Google. And now we're kind of at an impasse. Google, just feels like, well, you're getting all of our best stuff, and there's Bing's feeling is, this doesn't really impact our results. It's one tiny, tiny little signal that in some very rare cases might trigger it. And in fact, when you did your test with 100 queries, you only made it happen for 9 of them. And that's interesting, right? Because Google looks at it and they say, look at these 9 things. That proves that you're doing it. And they're right. But I can also take the same test and say, look at these 100 things that they ran. It only happened in a tiny number of cases in a worst case scenario, and Bing says that it really doesn't matter much, and that seems to support that as well. So that's where we're at so far. And we've had, after my article, then we had the Bing denial, and then the Google denial, and then Bing's denial of denial. And now I think we've just had Matt Cutts' denial of denial. So, it's, and I don't know where it could go. I mean, my own thing when I came down on this, by the way, was before I'd had a chance to talk to Bing about it in depth, was I can see where Google's coming from. On some of these things, when they come up with a spelling correction and Bing learns about it through the user, to me, it's not the user behavior caused that to happen. Google actually caused it to happen. And Bing just learned about it because they have a user there that's basically seeing it. So that I know is one of the top things that Google really gets concerned about. They think that's the thing we work the hardest on. One thing that I regret, though, is that I think some people took away, especially off my headline, which was accurate, I think, that they were copying the results. But some people, of course, don't read the really long article and came away thinking, well, Bing copies everything Google does. And I actually had a huge section where I was saying most of the Bing's results are different. Most of Bing's results seem to be calculated off of their own algorithm. This seems to be a minor thing. And I can see it being an issue in some of these cases, and I think that maybe they should not do it. But it's not like Bing has not worked very hard itself to come up with its own solutions and its own results. I still kind of feel like, if you just dropped it, then you're not going to have Google yapping at your heels like an angry little dog all the time after this. That's sort of the downside, is now no matter what Bing does, no matter what they do, Google is just going to say you got that because of us, which is unfortunate for them. But
how does Google respond to the whole where do they get their content from?
Well, and so that's been what has also, I think, been interesting in watching all this, is that I think Google fixated so much on the technicalities of, we have caught them finally, and we've laid out. I keep joking that it's like they went into the UN and they showed the Bing missile sites, and they said, now we need you all to join us, and we need to launch Operation Google Freedom, and we'll be the alliance of the willing, and it has been a very mixed response. You've got some people saying, let me get this straight, you're upset they might be leveraging you, whereas your entire business model seems to be built on leveraging other people's content. So I think there is some validity to some of that stuff. I think that there is a whole lot of hostility to Google that is now going to be unleashed, that it was not this clear-cut case that they thought it was going to be. I think Microsoft has done a brilliant job of fighting back with the PR. Part of that PR, by the way, was not responding until after it came out. I keep hearing people like, well, Google spoiled their party. It's like, it wasn't like Microsoft didn't know that was going to happen with some degree of time that they could have influenced the original article. They just chose not to. And they spent that time instead figuring out what it was that they wanted to come back with. And they've even said things like, well, Google basically committed click fraud. It's like, and they didn't, not in the way that any normal person would think about it, but it's a clever way of coming back at it. So I don't know. I hope we get back to where we're focusing on the quality of the results, and I would not like it that it's everything that Bing does has to be dismissed by Google as if you just copied us. But yeah, I agree with you. There is this sense of, with a lot of people, that, well, you leverage other people as well. And in fact, you can even then talk about it directly with the toolbar. Google will say, well, we don't use the toolbar to do what Bing is doing to us. But I'm still trying to get them to clarify, well, what exactly are you doing with the toolbar? They had originally said to me, well, we don't do anything with the toolbar. It doesn't impact the rankings. Then I'm going back, but you use the toolbar to figure out site speed. That's impacting rankings. So now do I need to have a list of every single thing you could possibly do with the toolbar so I can figure out whether or not when Bing says you do the same thing that you really are or not?
Yeah, it's the search wars continue, I guess. It's very, very interesting.
I have never, ever seen anything like this, and I've never seen this kind of response to it either. It's been bizarre.
Seth, I think you and I were talking earlier before the panel on changes to the quality of the results, and I know Google made some changes recently, and there have been a lot of controversy around these content farms that are out there, and whether it's content spam or whether just high volume content production. What have you seen out there, and what would you advise some of the people in the audience who are looking at various ways to produce content and are familiar with a lot of the solutions that are out there? Would you just comment on kind of the dynamics of the marketplace, and then how would you advise individual clients? And that content's important, but what kind of content is important, and how might that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think you used the right word, which is marketplace. Google's created, whether they want to or not, a marketplace where there is value for appearing on those pages. Some of the value goes directly to Google. Some of the value is derived from the people who are ranking in the natural search rankings. And once that marketplace is fully recognized, all bets are off, right? So Google's in that position of having to make sure that those results stay really, really relevant, or else they run the risk of losing market share to other people. Once we go to those pages and it's page after page after page of gibberish or slightly modified versions of the same piece, they'll lose. And so I think that what's coming is a pretty hard, and they've talked about it, come down on those kinds of pieces. So what people need to adapt to is, are you finding relevant content that's on those pages? And ultimately, that's going to be a series of marketplaces where when someone gets too egregious, they'll be shut down, and the other people will step in, and then they'll shut down on those, and I think it's in for a long, long piece. What I'd say to people who are doing it is don't look for a one-size-fits-all solution. If you can do it and the person sitting next to you can do it in the same click, then I would look at that as a short-term opportunity for investment, not a long-term opportunity for investment. And then just evaluate it that way and make those decisions on which one of your properties are long-term, need to have content that's going to persist through that, and which ones are not.
And Bruce, I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that. What is long-term sustainable content, and how do you encourage your clients to produce that? What kind of guidelines do you generally approach, encourage them to follow?
Exactly. I think that the content, we have moving parts. We've talked about a lot of them, but we have a lot of moving parts here. I think that one of the things that we're all seeing, and I'm going to lead into this real quickly, is local results are showing up more and more often. There are about 20% of queries have local results. That's going to increase and increase and increase, because as local results show up, Google actually makes more money. Because as you localize, the return on investment goes up for those local merchants. They pay more for pay-per-click. It's in Google's best interest to localize. So given that more and more local results show up, generally what we're finding is you'll have 3 results, then you'll have a bunch of local results. That means that it becomes compelling for us to be in the top 3, or we're not going to get any clicks. In order for us to be in the top 3, we have to appear as subject matter experts higher in general than our neighbors, the other people trying to rank for that term. Mediocre content is becoming less and less attractive in the algorithm. I think that we're finding that likes are replacing links in some cases, where social media and whether people will link to you, whether a community of people that are trusted will actually encourage and support you. As those become more and more factors in the search algorithm, we're finding that mediocre content has a tendency not to be liked. Nobody really wants to tell their friends to go read mediocre content. So we're going to probably see over the next year that the quality of the content either improves, or you're adding lots and lots of content down at ranking position 20,000, which isn't going to help anybody. Right. Certainly not help you. It isn't as much of a make-weight type situation where, I've got 1,000 pages of mediocre content and you only have 100, therefore I'm going to rank higher. I think that the specific content is going to have a greater influence about whether you do rank. And I also think that the type of content is going to matter. I think that video is content. One of the things that Google had done is they had taken out of the labs their video lab project, which would scan the soundtracks on video, convert it into a transcript. That has moved over to, Google has moved that over to YouTube. And Matt put me onto a link, and I follow the link, and it goes up, and it's actually on a Matt Cuts video. And so what he said was that the transcript is automatically created. So you scroll down the transcript, you take a line out of the middle of the transcript, you go to Google and search on it in quotes, and the only entry that comes up is that YouTube video.
Wow.
Well, to me that says that all forms of content that are a part of your page, if it's in the universal search, if it's there, that contributes to content of your page. That means that the definition of content is not only that it has to be better at the level of the written word, but that there's other forms of content now considered content. That's going to totally change the perspective. If all of your competition has videos and you don't, does that mean you're last? And that has to be answered. Certainly we know it helps conversion, but we still have to consider whether or not this content is part of internet marketing, and you have to have it in order to be a contender for ranking. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm right, and the quality of the content, if it's mediocre, is going to not cause you to end up in the top 3, it means that people that are now in the top 3, they're going to start changing. If local comes in, we're going to find for a specific neighborhood local results are going to rank, and local results may not have the quality of what we're seeing today on a national level. That means that the bar has been lowered when we go into local, which gives us a greater opportunity to come in at a local level and perform well. So I think that part of the targeting for the future ought to be, let's see if we can rank locally, let's see if we can drag our content to a level, and I hope it's not drag, but create our content at a level that is better than the other local content, right? It's like professional and amateur. The local sites are normally not as well prepared as the national sites. So I think we have a higher ability to compete with content. I think the definition of content is changing. I think we have to look at local capability and penetration and make all that come together.
One quick actionable thing you can take from there, we do know one of the signals is how many people click on your content, right? If you have content that ranks but never gets clicked on, it doesn't rank for very long. And we spend a lot of time optimizing the bejesus out of our PPC ads for strong calls to action. And then in the SEO world, way too often people say, I got visibility, that was the end of the story. And they don't worry about, did I make a compelling call to action appear in my snippet? So one thing, if you are working on that, is take the PPC ads that convert for you and change your meta descriptions and the content around that to make have a compelling call to action in your natural search results, because
why don't you follow up on that just a bit deeper
Sure.
for the audience? Explain exactly where does that text come from that shows up in the organic results, and both the headline and the meta description.
Yeah, sure.
How do we do that?
How do we do that?
Yeah.
There are a couple places that it looks for, as soon as I say this, maybe it'll change again. So all caveats, but first off, it looks in the portion of your site. If you take your site and you strip out all the navigation, all the footers, all the common things, on every single page, what's remaining is what the search engines will think about, that's what this page is about. That, and then the meta descriptions and the things that are hiding behind, that are unseen to the user. Google's changed a lot. It used to be you update the meta description, and that was it. You can feed it instantly. And that still works for some, but not all instances. But concentrate on working those keywords and those call to actions in that first paragraph around your H1, and you absolutely will see that update on your site as well. So
it's both the meta description as well as kind of the...
Change the meta description first.
The text around the H1.
That's the low-hanging fruit. You can do that, and then check back tomorrow and see if it's changed. If it hasn't changed, or if it's still pulling that from somewhere else, it used to pull from DMAs and a bunch of other locations, then start working your content to get that piece in there.
That's great. That's really insightful. Before we open it up for questions here in a few moments, let me ask Andy and whoever else wants to chime in about some non-Google Bing search marketplaces, whether it's mobile, or we talked a bit about social. Us as advertisers, as marketers, how important is mobile search becoming? How do we think about that market? How do we get into that market? And feel free to talk about social as well. I mean, you deal with a lot with international markets. I know mobile's huge internationally. Talk a bit more about that, maybe.
Well, I think the interesting thing about mobile is that it reaches the parts that other search engines don't get to. So there are parts of the world where access via a PC isn't so easy, but there are plenty of mobile phones. I was looking at statistics before this because I thought I might need to know a few numbers. And there are 820 million phones in China, which is about three to four times as many mobile phones as in the US.
Wow.
And the largest telecoms company is China Mobile. So I'm sorry to keep talking about China, but it is just so enormous that you can't ignore it. But then there are parts of the world like India and Indonesia and the Philippines that are really using, and even parts of Africa, are using mobile phones where PCs just would not even have entered into the statistics.
Now, that's much like, a lot of these places don't have landlines, which is why, the infrastructure just isn't there to support, the landline telephone, or much less PCs. So it's a different part of reaching an audience.
Yeah, it's better access for many people than the broadband line that they don't have. So, and the telecoms companies have done a good job of getting access to people in a way that the fixed line people have not really achieved in many parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else in the panel want to comment on that in terms of if I have a website that's obviously targeted towards a PC user, and I do marketing on the major search engines, how do I approach getting my site ready for some mobile traffic and then going out and trying to get that mobile traffic?
Well, my opinion is it depends on the persona of your audience for your keywords. So if your audience is business, you're more than likely not going to get as much benefit out of going mobile. If you have a social type product, that's almost entirely mobile. But I have a different perspective. Everybody uses the phone differently. You know, it's how am I using it? Do I prefer it over a PC? Do I not prefer it? Am I not near a PC? The iPad is succeeding because it is a mobile device that is like a PC to a great many people. When I go to conferences and I find a lot of SEOs, they're sitting there on an iPad, but what they're doing is they're running software connected to the PC back at the office, and they're using it as a remote terminal. So at what point are we able to relate to our mobile device, and is it really the device that we're using? My personal opinion is that if Google had its way, Android would come in, we'd have multitasking, every PC would have a little button, you push it and it becomes this big. And then you push it and it shrinks and it folds or it does something. But I think everybody, if they had their druthers, would rather have a PC in the form factor of a phone. Now, I think social is overwhelming us. I think almost everybody, how many people here did any tweeting or texting during this session? That would admit it. Okay? I mean, almost every meeting we go to, I've gone to meetings where people have had 3 phones. I haven't quite figured that one out. You know, but I think that what we're finding is that you use the right tool for the right problem. And that a great many people use phones because they happen to be mobile. They're moving. But if they had a PC that was as convenient, they would probably use the PC.
I will say, fire up your website on a BlackBerry, on an iPhone, on an iPad, and look at it, because it's shocking how many of them are big red X's. And interact with your website on somebody else's BlackBerry if you're on an iPhone, because it can be an extraordinarily eye-opening experience when you do that.
Another eye-opening experience is to find your site in the Google results and look at the Google preview, the little magnifying glass, and find out how much of your website is blocked out or not appearing in the preview, because that has a direct relationship to click-through rates. What we did is we found that the flash on our site, of course, showed up as a big block. It's a box. So what we did is we determined what the spider was for the preview. Then if that is the spider, we provide an image instead of the flash. And as soon as we did that, our click-through rate went up 15%.
That's a great
okay.
That's
so
a great
everybody ought to
tip.
Look at the preview and at least do that. I mean, conversion is important to everybody.
Yeah, that's great. The Google preview gives you a lot of insight into what at least the image crawler sees.
Well, it's almost the same size as an iPhone. I mean, depends on whether you expand it, but it's small enough that you can see what people would see.
Right.
And if you look at your page and you cannot read any of the letters, that tells you something, because that's going to impact your click-through rate. Your font's too small or your spacing is too tight. It's just a mush. The preview has a pretty good SEO.
That's great. Why don't we pause there and see if we have any questions from the audience. Yeah, I see a question here.
I'm Michael Kana from Post Time Media. I would love it if the panel would define mediocre content, and I didn't mean that as a joke. But also, could you tell us, just talk about original content versus content coming from feeds? Is it and in particular, what I'm interested in, if the content coming from feeds is hyper relevant to the site, really dialed in, how does Google look at that? How do you, as search engine experts, look at that?
I think I was the first one to use the phrase. So I'll defer to Dan. No. My take on mediocre content, when somebody views a page, the very first thing you do normally is to scan it. You take a second, you go through it, you find out if the keywords that you're after in your query are present on the page. So you don't really read the content on your first blush at the page. If you don't find any of your keywords bolded or headinged or anything like that, you don't even read the page. So the content is irrelevant until somebody finds that it may be what they're after in the first place. Then they will go back and actually read the page. Mediocre content is what happens when you read the page and says nothing new, nothing new, nothing new, nothing new. There's no value add to my existence. I'm not bringing away anything. There's no persistence here that I believe if I keep reading I'll get more of the same. That part causes them to leave. I think that where you get into the value add is when you have unique content that gives the reader something they didn't otherwise have. You add to their knowledge. Most people do research before they do shopping. They do shopping before they do buying. You have to actually walk them through that process and get them to convert. And I think your content is the tool of the trade to get them from point A to point B. Your content is how you convince them that you're trustworthy. Your content is how you convince them that you've got the answer they're after. If they read your content and find that you are not any better than the site they just visited in front of you, why should they buy from you? So mediocre content is just probably regurgitation of everything else on the web and no value add, no editorial comment, no particular spin, things that are common.
But what if just to play devil's advocate a bit, what if the topic is mediocre to begin with? I mean, what if I own howtoboilanegg.com? And I have a pretty generic article that says boil some water, throw the egg in, set your timer. You know, nothing profound there. No one's going to win a Pulitzer over that article. But if it's relevant to a very targeted domain, I mean, is there a...
You mean like Wikipedia?
You know, so a lot of searches, I would imagine, people want to just get some base level of information, sometimes on, you know, how often do I water my plants or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, every publisher in the world judges their content on pretty much the same metrics. What's my time on site? How many page views did I get? What's my per visit value from those visits? And you have to look at those and say, for this content, am I generating positive engagement or am I not? And I would say, outside of tracking the metrics, the definition is like pornography, right? I know it when I see it, right? We all know what mediocre content is. It's stuff that is not helping you drive those other engagements on however you're monetizing your site.
But this is a really difficult question, actually, because the problem with saying mediocre content is this type of content is that, so what if someone else copies that content and reuses it? Does that mean that content is mediocre because it doesn't connect up to the original producer or the original owner of the content? Does that make it mediocre? I mean, I think you also have to take context into this somewhere and say that great content is typically in a website which, let's face it, is a network of pages, and it's supported by other content on other pages within the same site. I think it's a much more complex idea than simply that content is mediocre and that's original, because the reader can't necessarily tell if that's been lifted or scraped.
Right. Yeah, that's an important distinction, I think.
Oh, I thought it was all great.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Yeah, we got a question coming up here.
Local search. So now that Places is getting so much more emphasis, are you aware of anyone or are yourselves tracking where people are clicking? PPC versus Places versus organic? Is someone doing like a heat map on where users are actually going?
I haven't seen anybody who's done a
because it used to be
new
organic, obviously above. Now that the organic results are so nearly below the fold, right?
Well, the Places results don't put the organic. The Places results are organic results.
Well,
that they look and feel and act like an ordinary organic result.
Well, I ask in context of maybe a directory site, for example. If you owned attorneys.com, okay? Before, there was a good chance that would rank organically, but now Chicago Attorney would have a higher ranking in the SERP because of the local contacts.
Yeah, but so there's two things that come into there. So your competition is different. Those local results that were tucked away onto the side are now competing with you much more directly. And I don't know that there's been that much of a shift in the behavior than from what you had before. It's just that the overall page is probably more relevant. But the other thing, and this goes back to the trends thing that you were talking about, the other big trend is that there are no normal search results. And that has been the case since December 2009, if I remember correctly, when Google started personalizing everybody's search results, regardless of whether or not you were signed into Google or not. You go to Google, you do a search, go back and do another search, and you might start getting personalized results based on your first search that you just did, even if you're not signed in, because it's going to cookie you, and it's going to start building up a profile of everything you've searched for. Even if it's the first time you've been there, it's just looked at what your IP address was. It's just delivered you results that are different for Los Angeles than what it was showing you for San Francisco. So to come back to the attorneys thing, even aside from the places issue, perhaps putting in the stuff that's there, attorneysawesome.com or whatever is already struggling with the fact that they're not seen as locally oriented. And your strategy there is you need to have a locally oriented site to do well if it continues on in that way.
Now, I have a specific example. Everybody knows what a hammer is, and this is my favorite example, so I'm going to keep using it. If you know what a hammer is, if you do a search for hammer in Google, and please don't all run out and do that right now, the number one result historically has been the Arm & Hammer Art Museum at UCLA. The second result is a vitamin company. The third result is a bowling ball company. The fourth result is Wikipedia. The fifth result is MC Hammer, right? And except for MC Hammer, none of them are tools. Come on, work with me. So when you really think about how that works, that's what Google's doing. They're trying to determine what you meant by that particular query for hammer. Whereas if you search for equipment, then search for tools, then search for hammer, they're going to assume your search for hammer was for a tool, right? It's going to bias the search for hammer. And it's possible I ranked number 20 for equipment, number 20 for tools, and number 20 for hammer, but that sequence of searches I could rank number 1 for hammer. So a big part of what Danny was talking about is the behavioral search aspect of it is changing entirely whether a one-word, keyword-rich query domain name match is going to really do as well because of the behavior aspects of multiple things. Now, I want to just comment, we have seen queries where if you have images, you'll have some organic listings, you'll have some localized listings, a couple of organic. We've seen first page results with as few as 4 organic listings on the entire page. That really cuts into position number 5, right? Position number 5, you had a fighting chance for traffic, now you're on the second page. And it totally changes things. And whether or not local results are there are based upon where was that person when they did the query.
I think you can still break out based on that informational, transactional, or navigational kind of search. There's certain searches like that you may just be looking for information. Google's gotten better and better and better at discerning what kind of keywords those are. So if you bucket your keywords and strategies, I would say, attorney has been classified by Google as a informational, not a transactional type of query, right? If I'm looking for a specific brand of DVD player, I'm going to get my shopping results. So your approaches have to be completely different based on those keyword groupings, and know that the competition for transactional and informational searches are going to be different. Just take different approaches to your strategy and SEO for that.
I think we have one more question up here.
Hi. With this new way that Google does that searching, what tool do you recommend for judging what your rankings are, and that's not affected by that kind of thing?
Well, if you have a tool that measures your ranking and it's driven by the API, the application that Google provides for developers, it's not going to have a location. In the API, you can set a location, but generally you wouldn't set a location. So it'd be more generic kinds of things. So any tool that uses an API interface, such as mine, would work fine. But part of the problem is people don't use APIs. So one of the things that you can do is in your Google search result, granted it's not a tool other than you're the tool doing the query, but you can set nearby. It's one of the parameters in the left-hand column, so you can say I'm in Chicago and then do a query and see what those results are. So you can manually do it on a case-by-case basis, keyword by keyword. There are tools that would eliminate the bias by location. The problem is if Google determines that every query is going to be biased by location, those tools don't necessarily give you the best answer.
Does Google still allow the API? I thought that they didn't allow automated queries, so I didn't think they would allow the API.
They're not issuing any more tokens.
They're not
they
issuing.
haven't issued tokens for quite some time.
They're not issuing tokens. They had switched to an AJAX API, and they're switching to a new one. Developers are allowed in if you, we have it, so we can do it.
The Webmaster Central will tell you your rankings. They'll tell you their average rankings based on their stuff, so you can turn to that. I think the bigger question is, why are you looking at your rankings? You should be looking. You should be looking at your analytics, because your analytics will tell you exactly whether or not you're getting traffic for those words or not. If you're thinking, I don't know if I'm doing well for pizza, your analytics will tell you if you're doing well for pizza, because you will see that you're getting a lot of traffic for pizza from Google across the board. And you'll see if it's risen or if it's fallen. If it's dropped off the map all of a sudden, then there's clearly something that's wrong. But that's going to be a far more accurate indicator of how well you're doing than trying to figure out what words you think people might be searching on and then going through and try to manually check and then compensate for, I want to have the normal results, especially when, and I can't say it enough, there are no normal results.
But to contradict or take an opposing viewpoint, you do want to know whether you need to work on a keyword because you're on the top of page 2 and one little push will push you into traffic versus I'm not in the world of this and it would take me 6 months to get there. So I think when you're looking at proof positive, absolutely look at those. But when you're looking at slicing and dicing that portfolio approach to what keywords you should go after, don't worry about the other stuff.
But
get the general gist of where you're at and determine if that's something that's appropriate for you or not. And say, I'm on the page 2, I need to know generally where I am for those terms, and don't get hung up on the exact position. Ranking is an indicator that will lead to milestones like traffic and conversions down the road. So just use it as a leading indicator.
Some of the page tools are great too, by the way. I mean, I've liked them in the past because they can give you an indication of this page perhaps could tip, right? But your analytics will tell you that, because your analytics will give you a list of every word that is bringing you traffic. And if you're on page 2, that is going to bring you some traffic.
I've never seen anyone get any good information that I'm on page 5 and getting traffic. They just don't get traffic.
Well, but what I'm saying is, if you look at your analytics, it's going to show you every word that you're getting traffic for, all the ways down to the onesies and twosies. You're going to get some sense of the things that are in the middle of the pack that maybe you could go and maybe you should work on, and you can say, geez, I can see I'm nowhere in the ballpark for this word, I'm not getting any traffic. The problem is the analytics tools do a terrible job, I think, of trying to tell you these are your tipping areas, right? They do a good job. This is what you got the traffic from, especially if you're using Google Analytics. Some of the third-party tools that try to do the ranking aspects do an excellent job of giving you the page 2s. And I would actually say if you're just trying to figure out those kind of tipping things, use one of those kinds of tools if you're looking for that tipping stuff.
Using the example I gave earlier of Hammer, the Art Museum might rank number 1 for Hammer, but it may not get any clicks. We have a client in the car space. They ranked number 2 for cars. but their click-through rate was 0.1% because the #1 ranked site for cars was a Walt Disney movie. So people would search for cars, see a Walt Disney movie, and then go up and change the query without clicking through. So ranking in and of itself is not the sole indicator that you're going to get the traffic. I think you need to have the analytics data. I think you need to have the conversion data. I think you need all of that as part of SEO. However, if your generic ranking report says you're on page 5, you're pretty sure that your ranking isn't going to generate a lot of traffic. I would bet everybody on this room, everybody, the only time you've ever gone in the search results in Google in the last year beyond page 2 is when you're looking for your own websites. Right? You don't go there when you do a normal query. If you don't find it in the first 2 pages, you give up. So that's a common behavior.
All right, I think we're